inside. Every gun in the tank was firing. I could see lots of Jerrys getting out of the place as fast as they could.
The tank crew opened up with a murderous machine gun fire. Those that were not killed instantly screamed as they lay there wounded.
We got clear through to the other side of the village. And when we looked back, we saw that Jerry had tumbled to the fact that we didn't have any infantry with us. And I could see German soldiers popping up out of cellars and dugouts and reoccupying the positions we'd just cleared. The officer said, "Looks like we've got to capture it all over again." So we did.
But this time, they will not have the element of surprise.
The tanks were not well armored on the top because the main armor had to be in the front.
And if you throw grenades, which the Germans have in abundance, onto the roof, that may well rupture the fuel tank.
And the explosion will go in every way, so down also, and kill, hopefully, the crew.
You know that with the fuel tanks inside the vehicle in which you're sitting, then you're sitting in a metal coffin that will turn into an inferno in seconds.
One tank takes a direct hit, and the remaining two keep moving, right into a wall of armor-piercing bullets.
And if you can imagine being inside an armoured vehicle when you're hit by armour-piercing ammunition. So it'll zip around the tank, bouncing off things. And if it hits a person, you can work out what that'll do. If it bursts a fuel line or it hits ammunition, then it'll turn it into a funeral pyre in a few seconds.
German gunners destroy the second tank and heavily damage the third, driven by Lieutenant Jack Harris.
I managed to get the old bus out of that corner. But by that time, we were all wounded. I got a bullet in the side of the neck. Bit of a bloody mess. It came in through the gun mount.
Harris has almost made it out of the town and to safety. At 7 a.m., Allied artillery opens up on Monchy-le-Preux, unaware that their own tanks are already in the town. And things get even worse for Harris and his crew, as a British shell destroys their tank. Only Jack Harris survives. The tank attacks on Monchy-le-Preux fail, but succeed in teaching the tank commanders the value of tactical surprise. And it will be the element of surprise that the Allies will employ in their coming winter offensive.
The Battle of Cambrai in November 1917 is a completely new way of using tanks. Now we're actually using them en masse, over 500 of them.
The stage is now set for what will become the first massed armored attack in history. November 1917. British tanks have been on the World War I battlefield in small numbers for more than a year, proving they have a role in modern warfare. Now, Allied commanders raise the stakes drastically. They send not dozens, but hundreds of tanks to the Western Front, all of them manned by history's first specially trained tank corps. The era of the massed tank attack is about to begin.
The motto of the British Tank Corps is, through the mud and the blood to the green fields beyond. And that was what had been looked for throughout the Great War, and that was what they hoped to achieve.
With the new tank corps, the Allies hope to punch holes through the Hindenburg Line. and capture the strategically important city of Cambrai. The Germans have made this part of the line one of the most heavily fortified sectors on the Western Front. There are more than 250,000 troops, dozens of machine gun posts, a maze of barbed wire, and, for the first time, specific countermeasures against the tanks.
One of the great antidotes to the tank was the German Hindenburg line, with trenches, say, 16 feet wide. And that was done on purpose to defeat the tank's one great ability to cross trenches.
Now we're actually using them en masse, over 500 of them. We're now using the Mark IV tanks, which are much, much better.
The Mark IVs have thicker armor, making them less vulnerable to machine gun fire. November 20th, 200,000 troops and almost 500 tanks are poised for an all-out strike on the Hindenburg Line. And the first massed tank attack in history begins. Advancing with them is Major William Watson.
To right of me and to left of me, in the dim light, were tanks. Tanks lined up in front of the wire. Tanks swinging into position. There was one tank to every 30 yards of front. When the guns began, the tanks were moving over the crest of the hill. The enemy trenches were already enveloped in thick smoke.
The German defenders are taken by surprise.
All hell broke loose. I could see the trench lit up by a sea of flame caused by the incessant exploding shells.
The sentry suddenly made an extraordinary remark. Herr Leutnant, something four-cornered is coming.
Then we saw a whole chain of these steel monsters advancing towards our trenches. I clung onto the hope that the trench would be wide enough to present the tanks with an impassable obstacle.
It's also realized that some of the tanks need to be equipped with fascines, or very big bundles of brushwood. And these are put on the nose of the tank. The intention is they can drop them into the very deep German trenches. The Hindenburg Line has enormously deep trenches. Without them, they'll become bogged.
They had a system to go over trenches, while one tank was dropping wood in the trenches, covering the second tank. The second tank was going over the trench, and that was like a murderous ballet rolling towards them. So the mass attack of the British tanks was very successful.
The tanks made rapid progress, crossing the trench to our left and right, maintaining heavy fire against the trench. We were utterly defenseless in the face of these monsters. This was no longer a battle. This was a massacre.
The Germans, facing the mass attack at Cambrai, were facing a new dimension of tank attacks, and they had no technical and psychological instruments to cope with it. They were completely overwhelmed on a military and a psychological base.
It looks like an overwhelming victory, but the battle for Cambrai is far from over. And the Germans have prepared a lethal surprise for the steadily advancing Allies. November 20th, 1917. The Allies launch history's first mass tank attack. Almost 500 new British Mark IV tanks lead infantry across the first trenches of the Hindenburg Line and advance towards their objective, the French city of Cambrai.
It's incredibly successful. The enemy, it would appear, have no way of dealing with this large number of tanks.
The tanks have crossed two lines of German defenses and now stand poised to break through the Hindenburg Line. Tanks of H Battalion are among waves of armor, moving up the right shoulder of Flesquières Ridge. Tank Harrier, commanded by Major Gordon Hassel and the others, stop at the summit. Cambrai, the Allied objective, lies in the distance. It seems too good to be true.
I said to my driver, Sergeant Callahan, I don't like this somehow. I don't know why.